It was a stormy night when Sarah and her friends decided to visit St. Benedict's convent, a place shrouded in mystery and chilling tales. The convent, abandoned for decades, stood on the outskirts of their small town. It was said to be haunted by the spirit of Sister Maria, a nun who had mysteriously disappeared under sinister circumstances. The group, armed with flashlights and bravado, approached the decaying gates of the convent. The air grew colder as they stepped onto the overgrown pathway leading to the main building. Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched, but she dismissed it as nerves. The legend of Sister Maria. Years ago, Sister Maria was known for her kindness and devotion, but whispers of her dabbling in forbidden rituals began to circulate. One night, she vanished, leaving behind a blood-stained cross and an ominous diary filled with cryptic prayers and warnings. Villagers claimed to hear her cries echoing through the convent at night. Inside the convent. As they entered the convent, the group was greeted by an eerie silence. The main hall was filled with broken pews, shattered stained glass windows, and a sense of despair. Their flashlights illuminated faded paintings of nuns, their eyes seeming to follow the group. While exploring, Sarah stumbled upon an old diary hidden beneath a pile of rubble. It belonged to Sister Maria. The last entry read, "They are coming for me. The shadows won't let me go. Pray for my soul." Suddenly a loud bang echoed through the hall. Everyone froze. The apparition. In the flickering beam of her flashlight, Sarah saw her. A figure dressed in a black habit stood at the far end of the corridor. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, and her lips curled into an unnatural smile. The figure began to glide toward them, her feet never touching the ground. Panicked, the group ran in different directions. Sarah and her best friend, Tom, ended up in the chapel. The chapel encounter. The chapel was worse. The altar was desecrated, with strange symbols drawn in what looked like dried blood. The air grew heavy, and whispers filled the room. Tom pointed to a mirror on the wall. In its reflection, they saw Sister Maria standing behind them, even though she wasn't physically there. The whispers turned into a chilling chant. "Confess your sins, or join me in the dark." The mirror shattered, and the room plunged into darkness. Sarah grabbed Tom's hand and ran. The corridors seemed endless, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. Doors slammed shut behind them, and shadowy figures appeared in the corners of their vision. Finally, they found an open window. Climbing out, they sprinted toward their car. As they drove away, Sarah looked back. In the rearview mirror, she saw Sister Maria standing at the gates, her hollow eyes watching them leave. Days later, Sarah began noticing strange occurrences. Crosses would fall off walls, and she'd wake up with scratches on her arms. One night, she found the diary on her bedside table, even though she had left it at the convent. The last page had new writing. "You can't escape faith. I'll see you soon." Sarah's scream echoed into the night. Sarah's life had become a waking nightmare after escaping the convent. No matter how hard she tried, the memory of Sister Maria haunted her. But now, it wasn't just a memory. Something sinister had followed her home. The strange marks. A week after their visit, Sarah noticed that the scratches on her arms formed symbols. They looked like the same markings she'd seen in the desecrated chapel. Desperate for answers, she searched online for any connection between the symbols and Sister Maria's story. She discovered that they were part of an ancient exorcism ritual, one meant to bind a soul to eternal torment. But the ritual had one flaw. It could backfire if someone tampered with it. Sarah realized that her finding the diary may have triggered the curse. Tom's disappearance. Sarah tried to contact Tom, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Concerned, she drove to his house. His car was in the driveway, but the windows of his home were dark. She knocked on the door repeatedly until it creaked open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of incense and something metallic. Blood. The living room was in disarray, with furniture overturned and strange claw marks on the walls. On the floor, she found Tom's flashlight, the same one he had carried into the convent. A single word was scrawled on the wall in what looked like ash. Confess. Sarah's chest tightened. She ran upstairs, calling for Tom, but the house was eerily silent. In his bedroom, she found a rosary twisted into a knot. On his bed lay a note. "She's here. Don't let her in." Before she could react, the door slammed shut behind her. The shadows returned. Sarah's flashlight flickered as she heard faint whispers. The air grew colder, and the room darkened, except for a figure in the corner. It was Sister Maria. Her hollow eyes stared into Sarah's soul. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face. The figure raised a bony hand, pointing at her. "Confess," it hissed. Memories flooded Sarah's mind, things she had buried deep. A cruel prank she and her friends had played on a classmate, leading to an accident. The guilt she had carried ever since. Sister Maria seemed to feed on her regret, growing more menacing with each passing second. The haunted diary. Clutching the diary, Sarah realized it might hold the key to stopping the haunting. She flipped through its pages, looking for a way to break the curse. Near the end, she found a prayer, written in a shaky hand. "Repent and light the sacred flame. Only then will the darkness recede." Sarah remembered an old church near the convent where a perpetual flame burned. She decided she had to return. Back to the convent against every instinct, Sarah returned to St. Benedict's convent. The storm that raged that night had returned, as if the place itself remembered her. This time, she was alone. The main hall was just as she remembered, but now it was filled with echoes of laughter and screams, ghostly remnants of the past. Sarah followed the diary's instructions, making her way to the church behind the convent. The sacred flame burned faintly in the altar's center, surrounded by unlit candles. Sarah began the prayer. "O Lord, guide me through the darkness. Banish the shadows that torment the lost. Bring peace to the restless soul." As she recited, the wind howled, and the temperature dropped further. Sister Maria's voice echoed through the church. "You think you can save yourself?" The final confrontation. Sister Maria appeared, her form more terrifying than before. Her habit billowed as if caught in an invisible wind, and her face twisted into a mask of rage. She lunged at Sarah, who clutched the diary, and continued praying. The candles around the flame ignited one by one, creating a circle of light. Sister Maria shrieked, her figure writhing in agony. Shadows began to peel away from her, revealing a fragile human form beneath. "You must finish the prayer," a voice whispered in Sarah's ear. With trembling hands, she read the final lines. "Grant her peace, and grant me forgiveness." The flame roared to life, engulfing the shadows. Sister Maria let out a final, piercing scream before collapsing into a pile of ashes. A new beginning? The storm ceased, and the church fell silent. Sarah left the diary on the altar, hoping the curse would end with it. But as she walked away, she felt a familiar chill. Turning back, she saw the diary had vanished. In its place was a blood-stained cross. And then she heard it. "I'll see you soon." The events of that night had left Sarah broken, but the nightmare wasn't over. The cross, The chilling whisper and the vanishing diary haunted her every waking moment. She tried to go back to her normal life, but the darkness of the convent seemed to follow her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. The unseen presence. It began subtly. At first, Sarah thought it was just her imagination. A cold breeze brushing her neck, strange noises in the dead of night, shadows that didn't quite align with the furniture. But then the occurrences grew stronger. The mirrors in her house would fog up with a message written in condensation. "I'm still here." One night, she woke to the sound of soft footsteps outside her bedroom door. The air was thick with an unnatural chill. As she opened her eyes, she saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. Her heart raced as the figure stepped closer, its face shrouded in darkness, but unmistakably familiar. Sister Maria. Before Sarah could scream, the figure vanished into thin air. The room was still cold, and the feeling of being watched remained. She knew then that Sister Maria wasn't gone. The curse had never been broken. A new connection. Desperate for answers, Sarah reached out to Father Gabriel, an old priest who had once worked at the convent. He had heard rumors of Sister Maria's dark past, but he had always been reluctant to speak about it. After hearing Sarah's story, however, he agreed to meet her. Father Gabriel explained that Sister Maria's disappearance had never been fully investigated. The convent had been abandoned shortly after her vanishing, and the authorities had given up on finding out what happened. There were whispers that she had turned to forbidden rituals, trying to commune with the dead to gain power. But something went terribly wrong. Father Gabriel revealed a shocking detail. Sister Maria wasn't just a nun. She had been part of a secret order within the church, one that dabbled in dark rites to control spirits. The order had been disbanded years ago, but its remnants still lingered in the world. Sister Maria's soul, trapped in a cycle of torment, had been trying to escape ever since. The relic Father Gabriel handed Sarah an old relic, an amulet said to hold the power to ward off evil spirits. "This is the key," he said. "If you truly want to free yourself from her, you must return to the convent and confront what she's become." With the amulet in hand, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. She could finally end this nightmare. The return to St. Benedict's convent. Sarah knew she had no choice but to return to the place where it all began. This time, she wasn't going alone. Father Gabriel agreed to accompany her, hoping his presence would provide some protection. As they drove toward the convent, the weather grew ominous. The clouds gathered, and the wind howled through the trees, as if the earth itself was warning them to turn back. But Sarah couldn't. She had to face the evil that had haunted her for so long. The gates of St. Benedict's convent stood as imposing as ever. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding. Sarah gripped the amulet tightly as they entered the grounds, the eerie silence broken only by the sound of their footsteps on the crumbling stone path. The confrontation. They made their way to the chapel, where the sacred flame had once burned. The walls were covered in symbols, runes, and sigils that seemed to pulse with dark energy. The floor was stained with something that resembled blood, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. Suddenly, a low, guttural laugh echoed through the chapel. It was Sister Maria's voice, but twisted, demonic. "You think you can stop me now?" she taunted. "You should have stayed away, Sarah. You can never escape what I've become." From the shadows, Sister Maria emerged, her form more terrifying than ever. Her once peaceful face was now a grotesque mask of anger and suffering, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Her body seemed to shift and distort, as though she was made of shadow and smoke. Father Gabriel stepped forward, holding up the amulet. "In the name of God, I command you to leave," he shouted. The air crackled with energy as Sister Maria screeched in fury. "You think this trinket will save you?" she hissed. "I have become more than a spirit. I am the darkness itself." But Sarah wasn't afraid anymore. She stepped forward, clutching the amulet in her hand. "No," she whispered. "You are nothing but a lost soul, and I will send you back." The final battle. With those words, Sarah threw the amulet into the air. It glowed brightly, casting a blinding light throughout the chapel. Sister Maria screamed as the light engulfed her, her form writhing in agony. The shadows that surrounded her began to dissipate, and her monstrous appearance started to fade. "Forgive me," Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes. "You were lost, but you don't have to be anymore." Sister Maria let out one final anguished cry before she was consumed by the light. The shadows that had haunted the convent for so long vanished, leaving the chapel in silence. The next morning, the convent seemed different. The oppressive air had lifted, and the dark presence was gone. Father Gabriel and Sarah stood in the now peaceful chapel, looking at the spot where Sister Maria had vanished. "She's at peace now," Father Gabriel said softly. "The darkness has been banished." Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders, but she knew that the experience had changed her forever. The horror she had faced was behind her, but the lessons would stay with her. She had confronted her own guilt, faced her fears, and ultimately helped a lost soul find peace. As they left the convent, Sarah glanced back one last time. The wind had died down, and the sun was beginning to rise. She could almost feel Sister Maria's presence, no longer vengeful, but serene. And for the first time in months, Sarah felt free.